Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most benevolent, the most merciful. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, all praise due to the Lord of the worlds. Rabbi Firli, may God forgive us for the mistakes that we know we make and the mistakes that we don't know. Hello everyone. I wanted to just speak about an idea that I found interesting. And so, if you look at the title, you're gonna see that it says the crossroad of the question, how are you? Now, this episode is way more laid back, and I'm just being rather playful with it. I saw a very interesting duality, or let me start here and say that I noticed that people say, how are you doing? You know, when they meet a familiar face, they say, how are you doing? But something that we don't ask is, how are you being? Right? That's not, for some reason, in the cultural fabric. It just feels like a question that's off. You know, you see someone and, you know, you suddenly ask them, how are you being? It's because if you pay attention, the culture and communication, a lot of it is based on activity. So we say, how are you doing, in the consideration that that individual has been doing things up to this point that we meet him again. But when the question, you look at the question, how are you being? It's wondering about what state a being is in throughout all the activities they do. Right now, you can ask the question to me, how are you doing? And I'll be like, I'm doing a lecture. You know, I'm doing okay, right? But if you ask me, how are you being? That's a totally different answer. So immediately we can notice that there's a difference to the response to how are you being and how are you doing. So there's a duality here to study. The duality is the difference between what we do and what we are. Now, if you look at culture, you're being judged, and especially, you know, men, for what they do. You can say women are more about how they're being. Do you know? That means you know, is the lady being graceful, you know? What's the term? Self-poised or something like that, right? But anyways, it applies to all of us, right? Now, something we think in culture is that often we have to do something to be something. There is a truth to this, okay? Because if you don't do anything, you cannot be something else if it's a looped pattern. And the way the brain works, this is something that should be very significantly said to youth, right? Like in schools, people should go talk about it. That your brain works in accordance to processes you repeat. So there are neural networks. The brain is in some sense being sculpted, and what the future means to you has, how you are going to be in the future, it does relate to what you do. But if we can see that doing things leads to being something, the question must also emerge in your mind that what if being leads to doing something, specific, right? And for me, in just an effort to study human behavior, we are looking at an idea called motivation. Now, if you were a director on a film set, the actor may come up to you and ask you, what's my motivation in this scene, for example? Because the actor is trying to figure out the subtext in which the character that the actor is creating, let's say improvising or whatever, even scripted, but the actor is creating the character. What is the motivation? So really, when we go to study something, it's like studying a painting is way simpler than studying like a film. Do you know? So it's in some sense looking at the human being and being, in some sense, asking yourself what activates this. That means you right now. What is activating you? What is moving you? And how much of that is based on the user in the system? And how much of that is based on the system administrator? Which is another way of saying how much of what happens as you is under your own jurisdiction. Like how much of it is controlled and how much of it is not in your control. So to kind of expand how I'm going about this lecture right now, I pretty much was like, let's look at the question, how are you? Like somebody says, how are you? Right? And then I thought that in some sense the mind, of course, it's like, how are you doing? And then how are you being? And when we look at the behavior, so it's as if we understood that, okay, how we are is in regards to activity and in regards to being. So the contrast between doing and being. And now I'm pausing this idea and being like, let's study human behavior. And human behavior, what's fascinating is different cultural programs are actually another way of saying different ways human beings are activating in environments. Okay? And if you see it in three levels, that there's a personal level, a societal level, and a universal level, you'll suddenly notice in the personal level, especially if you're alone, you are actually being more, right? Even if you do things, it could be like even subconscious. Let's say like you, I don't know, scratch your back, right, in mid conversation with someone. And later on somebody says, "Hey man, do you remember when you scratched your back?" That person could be like, it could be subconscious in the behind the scenes motivation. So now what's important is to see to look at different cultural programs and to in some sense wonder about the reality behind these two questions, right? And behind how doing leads to being and how being leads to doing things. On some level, also, there is the consideration of the individual of value. So the motivation for an action, which can be to be something, is in some sense how is the moment being evaluated, right? So me just being here, there is a value here, you know? The value could be stated simply like, okay, a human being is existing on earth, I'm being, okay? But when I do something, for example, give a talk, right? So it went from a state of just being here, and the moment the movement, that means I'm like, okay, I'm going to give a talk, that's an addition to the moment, right? So we can say this whole thing about doing things to be something is in some sense a sort, there is an arithmetic behind it. That in some sense we are adding something by our activity to shift the value of our being. But just like how in driving you can press the gas and press the brake, similarly you can stop doing things and it shifts your value to yourself, at least. Let's start. And of course, human beings in relationships, there's a concept called boundaries. And boundaries is about in some sense what needs to be added to the moment through communication to change what the value of the moment is being. You know, there is this view that mathematics, and of course it's human extraction of reality, but there is some sort of code to reality, that it is a system, it has precision, it is fine-tuned, there is a program way things happen here, okay? But what I find fascinating now, right, is that this whole thing of doing things to become something, from one angle it can be reduced to a value proposition. What that means is, let's say right now my value is like 7, okay? Like how I'm being, let's give it a number, 7. But now imagine I want to be like, you know, like 11, okay? I want my value to be 11. It's as if I need to do 4 things. For example, either something is being added to the moment, the numerical value of being goes up based on what we do, or you stop doing certain things, and imagine out of 7 it comes down to 5, right? And this is just to give you an example that when somebody asks you how are you being, it's in some sense you looking at what value you are. Now, also based on the success of the action. So imagine the person's like, I've started a business. I'm the business, let's say right now is 0. You know, I'm gonna start it, and I'm going to add, you know, value to this business. I'm going to do specific things, get sales, you know, find a team, you know, strategize, go through strategic leadership and whatnot, right? Whatever. But the person has to, in some sense, add something. And since addition really is, there is something entering the value, it's automatically activity oriented. Do you know? That means when you want to add something, it has to be a verb. But when you want to subtract something, you don't necessarily need to do anything. Do you understand? It's similar to, for example, a person, like the idea of self-care, like you take care of yourself. Let's say, you know, shower, dress properly and all that. And if you stop doing that, do you understand? Not just in the cultural program, but your perceived value. Your value changes. right? Now, you can also be oblivious to how valuable you are. Do you know? That means you might be a person in this world being like, oh man, I'm nothing. Do you know? Somebody told me I was nothing when I'm young, and I've just been functioning with this value. But you don't know how valuable you are. And what's even more fascinating is that you cannot know the extent of it. So now I've taken this lecture to the notion that us activating to shift our being. I'm seeing further to this imagery. Let me contextualize it differently. So I'm in this world, I'm a being. Let's say you just start. Okay, just like a video game, you start somewhere, you're a being. Then, based on what you do, you are either reducing value or increasing value. Let's say the value of self. Now, if we zoom in on when you do something, we notice that the way the human intelligence seems to work, like even using myself as an example, I was being in a state, then I decide to give a lecture, okay? And then based on how I perform, moment to moment to moment, and how I give the lecture, do you understand? And how it completes, right? The success or lack of success of it. It leads to my own value increasing or decreasing. Now, keep in mind, I said that there's three contexts that we can just, simply look at reality. There is a personal level, there is a societal level, and then there's a universal level. Now, you have to ask yourself, based on which value is your activity, your action motivated? That means right now, let's say if I drink like, water, that is an action that is increasing my personal value. But let's say me being like, okay, let's talk about new perspectives online, you know, that to me also has a societal value. But because I'm a person and there's many things I don't know, a part of this societal value is also dependent on the interaction of the users, of the viewers. So believe it or not, like it's hilarious. I see this in real time, in the sense that when the viewers add, I notice a subtle energy shift. When the viewers reduce, I suddenly notice an energy shift. And I've asked myself, why is this happening? Because it shifts the expectation. Do you understand? That means when there's, for example, zero viewers, right? I'm like, okay, this talk of mine has personal value. I'm still hearing it. I hear my own lecture as I give it. Do you know? So it has personal value, but suddenly when there's the attendance of other minds in the room, suddenly it has societal value. Do you understand? And if you look at reality, you notice it is like concentric circles, and these being groups, like let's say first yourself, then your family, then your, partner, colleagues, then your nation, da 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 da, it goes up, right? So what we do, it's important to consider before we do anything, which sort of level of value we're shifting, or in some sense, our activity is motivated by which level of value. That means me giving this lecture, what makes me excited to even give it is that it has societal value. And if it passes the test of time, there's even the fascination that it might have universal value. Do you know? So, how you are being, what you do is being motivated by an expectation in either one of these three values. Okay? Personal, societal, and universal. Okay? Now, in certain cultures, and there's many cultural programs right now, it's even mind-boggling, like it's like kind of awe-inspiring how many different personal value systems there are, and how many of these personal value systems are being together as societal value. Do you understand? That means when you look at human beings, you're like, okay, obviously this human being has a value to themselves, right? Personal. They have a personal value. But you also see what the person does outside of themselves. Like, for example, thinking is an activity that has personal value. But if you act externally, let's say you think and go solve like a societal problem, anything external, that has societal value. Whether it's like, being rude, shouting suddenly or something. And different human beings I've seen, especially, where I've seen this? I've seen this in the subway. You can see all these different sensitivities of those who have that care, their societal value is high, right? That means they care how society is perceived and perceives, right? And then there are those who don't value, they don't have the societal level, or they've given up on it, of sort of maintaining their individual personal value to kind of be functional in the societal level. So right now, any action that we do, and it's important to say conscious action, because us breathing right now, that's technically an activity, right? If we ask what does our breathing have a value, it has a personal, societal, universal. It's technically all of them, but it's also subconscious. So it's not consciously, there isn't a conscious motivation unless you're like, you need air, right? So it's fascinating to me that the question, if somebody asks me, how are you being? To some degree, my own value of how I'm being is based on what I do. Do you know? I think we all are like this. It's based on what we do, right? And when you, for example, see someone better than you do something better, right? Then it's as if a part of you also now has access to that archetype, right? And then your personal value shifts, you know? I can speak easily about it now. But communication for me, I guess from a humorous angle, has always been more complex than it has to be. Than it had to be. Okay. Not has to be, had to be. Now I'm more, simpler being. And it's by the expectation of your energy level. So when you're young, you have dreams of I'm going to become an Olympian. I'm going to become like a billionaire. I'm going to become like, like this, that. But as you live life, you come to realize that certain activities you can do, and these activities are also, there's open hallways for them, right? Empty hallways for them, meaning that means it's not a crowded, you know. But some activities you can try, but they are not for you. Do you understand? That means they don't align to how you have valued your own being. Now, I want you to consider those three levels I said. We are going through them, right? There was something I read read for the viewers about in an earlier episode, which was a view of Ken Wilber's quadrants. To be honest, I shouldn't say it like this, but because before what he said, I had a sort of, I'd reached that conclusion. I want you to now look at this going from personal value from developing personal value with what you do when you're with yourself, to developing societal value with in regards to what you do with others when you're around others, and then to develop universal value, which is in relation to not just you, for example, treating yourself well and then being something to feel something, and not just treating others well, but now you have become sensitive to how the universal value is, or what the universal value is. And that value is so immense and reaches points that you cannot know, that on some level, if you give up, you just live as a societal entity. But if you choose to go a bit deeper into this wonder about it, you begin to see the universal value surpasses human culturalism. So how are you being? And to kind of notice how different actions shift that value. So if somebody asks me, how are you doing? I look at how I'm being. And when I look at how I'm being, Of course, there's a dimension of time here. That means how I was, how I am now, and how I will be. One has to do with the function, the other has to do with the outcome. Let's say you take a culture that has more personal value than societal value. It's like based on the environments we're in, our value changes, and human beings are in a sort of value selection game, and we do the activities that lead us to those values. For example, you have a value of like expecting this talk to be a specific way, and if the activity of listening to it doesn't, for example, it's not up to par. Do you understand? You act in accordance to how your value shifts. Your expectation sets your value. So what you expect is setting your value, and then what you do or what happens shifts that value. So pretty much human life is a value game, value shifting game. The values are constantly shifting by our activity and inactivity. Now, I'm someone who's spoken about this idea, an idea that I'm very fond of. It is in some sense the idea of the advanced civilization, which in some sense is in some sense a very supreme question. That means if somebody can come up to you now and say, how are you doing? And you give an answer right now. And then somebody says, how are you being? Let's say you give some answer to that. But if somebody comes and asks you, how are you doing? Or in like a million years from now, how are you doing in, let's say, 10,000 years from now? Or 1,000 years, so let's make it more relatable. Let's say somebody asks you, how are you doing in 1,000 years? Or how are you being? And then because we have our lifespan is, let's say, just for the sake of speech, 100 years. Therefore, the question automatically leaps to what is the human being doing? So in some sense, how is the species doing in 1,000 years? How is the species being in 1,000 years? If it's in this time frame of 100 years, how are you doing? Joey from Friends, understood this. So for me, do you see how the value suddenly changes? And also our expectation also has to do with our time frame, right? So your personal value, let's say, is based on 100 years, but the societal value gives you an opportunity to somehow have your personal value outlive you, surpass you. So, and it leads to different answers. That means it's like if we see these questions as a problem set, different problem sets lead to a different answer, right? So asking like, how are you doing in like 100 years, or how are you being in 100 years? I wanted to kind of mesh the words being and doing and call it do-being. Do-being. But anyways, now try to answer this question. Me and you have one thing in common right now. whoever you are, and guys, I'm drinking a Gatorade here. What we have in common is that we are being in the same physical moment. That means it's like just like how I give a live stream, it goes live online. You as an individual have become live, right now. So all the human beings alive now, they're kind of live streaming their conscious existence. Their conscious existence is being live streamed. It's live, and when something is live or alive, that means it is introduced to a context of known and unknown, and that's what makes it interesting. Do you know, the more we know things, right, it's as if there's less motivation to do things. But when a situation has uncontrollable, not uncontrollable, but unknown factors, unknown variables to it, then there is an incredible motivation of doing things because we don't know how we can shift the value. So your motivation as a being on earth in this system is based on how you shift value. And what's fascinating is that there's different preferences in it. Somebody may be comfortable just shifting their own personal value the whole lifetime. Somebody might have been raised in a way where they didn't get, they didn't properly, let's say, or they are more excited by what happens to society rather than just what happens to them. So if I ask you right now, are you more interested in what happens to you, or are you more interested in what happens to all of us, to civilization, or are you even more interested in what's going to happen to the universe? Do you see the scale of fascination increases because the more far out it is, the more unknown it is what may happen. And human beings, they say confidence, confidence, confidence. Confidence is like your brain creating a model over reality in which nothing other than what you expected can happen. Do you know? It's kind of strange, but narcissism is a sort of confidence. But the issue with that confidence is that it's limited. I have noticed if you were to compare somebody who's a narcissist and somebody who's depressed, you will see that the allure of the narcissist is way more than the allure of the person who's depressed. Why? Because the narcissist, even though making the error of refusing to see outside of oneself, right, is still certain in their personal value. But the person who is, let's say, not depressed or kind of, low energy or something, looking down on things, that person doesn't have certainty. Do you understand? Like, your performance is based on your certainty, but it's up to you to, in some sense, check it out in the sense of, is my certainty just based on my personal level, or is it based on societal level? Do you understand? Personal level could be like, a person can be like, yo man, my brain is going to project a model that I'm going to cross a highway and nothing's going to happen. Now, the person can go do that, and let's say there is a chance, I don't know what the statistic would be, that the person can just look in front of them, not look to their sides, and cross a highway. Okay, and nothing happens. Let's say there's a small percentage that can happen. But that person is functioning under only personal value. Their confidence is just based on personal value. If the person wants to have confidence as a societal being, okay, then the person needs to, in some sense, what's the term? Project a sort of greater, or embark on a greater analysis of the moment, which is another way of saying to consider values outside of oneself. Do you see what I'm saying? There is a difference, you know? Let's say someone has been just serving society and they haven't taken care of themselves, for example. If you ask the person, how are you doing? They in some sense they would in some sense not be, let's say, confident in the answer. But if the person has been serving society and helping some part of society function, and you ask them, how is society doing, right? Of course, also based on how the brain works and patterns, and in some sense, that person's energy level and attention suddenly, like their attention shifts their energy level, because now they're looking at what is the value of the whole thing I've contributed to. Do you see? It's very, I think everybody is going to agree with me when I say this, that pretty much all the human beings I've seen, they are living for, I don't want to say something, but they're living for a moment of value, or the value of a moment. Okay? And their motivation is based on that. So I guess I can say they're living for something. Do you understand? But now the question is, are they living for only that which is personal? That means affects them mainly. Or are they living for something that affects more? For example, a family man is living for more. Do you understand? That means it's just a greater game to start a family than to just live alone. You know? But it's also a greater game to advance civilization. It's one of the coolest games. So it is clear to me in this moment that human beings are being things. They're playing a value game. There's different value propositions, from how you wake up in the morning and how you feel about yourself, that being a personal value proposition, to how you perform in reality in the world, and there being a societal value proposition. So you, as a being, based on how you choose to value the moment initially, your actions are motivated by shifting that value. What is the greatest shift of value? Well, with value comes responsibility. The responsibility to maintain one's value. Why are human beings getting offended so much? You know, or when something wrong happens, why does the person, something wrong is said, why is the person getting offended? Because they are taking it personally. What the communication is shifting their personal value. In higher, let us say, games or higher levels of the activity of intelligence, the person, when they say they have become an adult, means that they have reached a point where they can notice beyond their personal value. They can become responsible also beyond their personal value. That means whether you're a leader or not, it doesn't matter. Wherever you are, your responsibility is based on the outcome of that event. And so the game of life is like, how do we maintain our personal value? And then how do we, in some sense, progress as a societal value to then reach the finale of what is the universal value? So you tell me, is a person just living for 100 years more complex to you, more advanced? Or a being who is caring about the value of not just what is happening now? Remember I said there's a dimension of time. So the personal value, who was I in the past, who am I now, and who will I be? When we go to the societal dimension, right, the public dimension, we are in some sense being like, how was civilization before? How was humanity before? How is humanity now? And how will humanity be in the future? You see that? And if somebody does something wrong, right, we're like, yo, reduction in our expectation of the future societal value. But now the problem is way more complex, this situation for humanity. Why? Because there are different cultural programs. Because if you truly get to the essence of what does value even mean, that means, like, does a tree have value by just being a tree, or does it only have value because, like, it's providing oxygen or it's providing fruit? Do you see? So to me, more than it's like there is something called knowledge and human beings need to get it. It's more like a live action game. Like it's like this massive, it's like this event that's taking place. First of all, it's moving, and because it's moving, reality is going forth. There's a constant shift in values, and because there's shifts in values, we ask ourselves, where should our certainty be dependent on? Now, the mind has a very sophisticated capability. Why? Because typically, you can say, the common man, the common human being, their value is based on patterns of the past. They've noticed how something happens in the past. They look at what's happening now and they're like, this isn't like that. Do you see? But there are moments where, let's say somebody in a chess game, and they suddenly see ahead of their turn, they see how they're going to checkmate the opponent. They see it. Do you understand? This is something beautiful about chess also. You just suddenly see the workable model, you know, the beautiful geometry. You suddenly see it. It is clear to me that just like we have immature people and mature people, we also have immature civilizations and mature civilizations. The mature civilization is considering more than itself. Like the mature individual, that means it's everything that happens doesn't just relate to them. They notice that it's relating to every conscious entity in the moment. It doesn't matter if there's a squirrel even, like, you know, or a bird, like, you know, drinking water from a fountain, right? It doesn't matter if it's a human being, a bird, or whatever it is, right? The notion is that, okay, just like how I am, there are others that are being. How are they being? Do you know? And this is where the consciousness of the person asking the question, how are you doing, is a bit more. That means they're way more mature than the person just waiting to be asked. At some point, you get bored of your own value. I don't know, but I think this may be happening for some people. That unless you activate differently, the value proposition, the personal value proposition, is the same. That means honestly, like I can even see it now, that like what's motivating me to give this lecture, for example, is because the personal value of my moment didn't feel satisfactory to me. That means it's as if I felt like there was more I could, uh, there is more value I can add to the moment before I close my eyes and then wake up tomorrow and it's another moment. And it's based on the outcome. Remember, outcome orientation also based on the framework of time. So you tell me, I want you to just for a second put yourself in my position. You had an option to do something that just had momentary value for yourself, or you have an option to do something that can have potential like futuristic value. Like obviously you do that which is societal value, that increases the societal value. But eventually you reach a point where you get curious about, fascinated by the universal value. The universal value would be equivalent to wondering again, like in the future, like thousands of years from now, how will intelligence be informed? How will it be informed, and how will it be informed? And in some sense, like that's a very fascinating question. Just wondering about the future opens doors to the mind that you never knew existed. And honestly, in regards to maturity, you can see it. That means a mature species, let's say if a mature individual, the difference between immature and mature, let's say an event, something happens, like let's say a child is, running and their hand hits a vase and the vase breaks. Let's say hilariously the child gets upset and hides or avoids that moment. It's because that activity, that event, just related to the personal value. But imagine in other situations, let's say you're in a public gathering. This was an experience I had recently. And you have one individual who suddenly gets up, starts shouting at everybody, and starts blaming them. It's like, hey, it's all your fault that I'm like this, you know. And the others who've realized that one extracts value out beyond themselves, they all are maturely just looking at, all right, this person is still lost in their own value. They're not even ready to see values greater than themselves. Like, to become even a parent or to be parent, you must have this ability even. Most likely the system admin provides it to you. But usually for most human beings, it's not that deep. It's more like just maintenance. So now this metaphor being applied to a species, the immature species cannot see outside of itself. It still blames itself. Human beings blame one another for what's messed up. Do you know? But the mature species is like, all right, how does all of our behavior have an influence and value greater than itself? So you know what it is? Just like how there's a person, the relationship a person has with society, a civilization has with the universe. So if for a person their own value is more important than the value of others, immature, right? But if a species similarly, not if, similarly, if, similarly, if a species was more important to itself than to the what's going on in the universe, then that's an immature species. Do you see? It's not even about world peace anymore. Even if we had world peace right now, because the responsibility is not beyond the human framework, do you understand? It's still an immature species. So the world could be at peace, but it doesn't mean humanity is mature. The maturity of humanity, whether it's there's a long way to go or not, is dependent on how much it can learn to appreciate more than the human form. And believe it or not, many people have actually reached this point, but they reach it through, let's say, conditional, let's say, through programs. For example, for me specifically, religion was a way of connecting to a value greater than myself, but spirituality was still just personal value updating. Do you understand? Now, you can't talk about anything without wondering about its extremes, really. So one can say that doing nothing, it's like we think about, all right, what's the, something you can do that has no value, and one can say doing nothing, I mean activity wise, but in reality even doing nothing has a value too. But its value is more based on how the outside responds to you doing nothing, more than you doing something and then the outside responding. From one angle you're moving the values, from another angle you're not doing anything. The environment is giving you value. you know and in just wondering, I keep going back to this idea that, okay, let's say the species suddenly reached that point where it's becoming mature. It's like right now it's like a youthful species, it's not an adult species, right? Because it cannot still acknowledge that there is value extraction possible beyond just what the humanization has been, right? For example, again, religion is unique, or different models. There's so many, thought structures out there. The architecture of them is vast. But for me, for example, I'm Muslim. Not for example, I am Muslim. And for me, the religion has value because it is allowing me to connect. Okay? That means, why is religious activity valuable to me? Right? Because it is placing me, right, in a space where I am considering a value greater than worldly value. Do you see? Establishing this relationship with the system admin, I call it, because I am still a human form, as a user in the system, existential system, an experiential user of this existential system. However, I'm experientially using this existential system, or it's leading to experience. But to have a relationship with the original value, that means if you wanted to consider the origin of all reality, You have the option of considering whether it's going to be intelligent or not. If you choose for it to be intelligent, it opens the crossroad of how advanced or not advanced is the intelligence. For example, we think that an atheist, okay, or a materialist comes and says, hey guys, it's all nothing. It's just stuff in space, okay? That to me is less sophisticated than what would be the most advanced intelligent probability of it. Do you see what I'm saying? So to render reality as devoid of value is so much more boring than to wonder what could be the most advanced value, because it is not nothing. There is a geometry here that is so unique in how it's even being here that it's as if, and this is something, it's as if existing is miraculous. Do you see? So anyways, you have different relationships with different perceptions, right? And let's say different regions of value. So you can say a person can become very fascinated in the notion of the system admin if they reach a point where they are wondering what is the expectation on the overall value of the whole system. Because if the whole system goes to nothing, no value, boring, like there's nothing to even engage. But if the whole system, for example, in Islam, everything returns to the system admin, to God. Now take this in. God is an intelligence of an absolute nature, in the sense that it is beyond what it has created. It is beyond form. So it's as if the world was simulated, and we are right now a user in this simulation, a simulated user. Now the question has come, is the simulation just going to go pitch black, right? Or is the simulation going to be converted, or is it going to return to the original value that simulated the simulation? And the reason religion was ahead of its time, because it has made the original value intelligent and accessible. Even though its intelligence is beyond our comprehension, but it's accessible. So an individual extracts value by noticing that the system is being administered. That's, for example, a religious person gets that value. But if we bring it back down to the notion of civilization, civilization is extracting its value. Of course, there's inner dimensions to mankind, but it is extracting its value on external events. And the inner and external are not separate. So if they asked a civilization, they asked humanity, how are you doing? If the answer is based on the past, I believe it leads to more immaturity. But if the answer is based on the future, it's considering domains beyond fixed value. Why can I talk about the past or my past easily? Because they're fixed values. It's like decoded symbolism, right? But when we look at the future, there's still that unknown space where whatever is happening now can move differently. And if we look deeper into the idea of, they ask a species, a humanity, a civilization, how are you being? That means imagine somehow humanity, you could ask it a question, and you ask, how are you being? The answer doesn't just fall on smaller, like, see, there is, I'm noticing this point right now, that when somebody asks you, how are you being, there is a fractal nature to it. What does that mean? That means, how am I being? But then what am I? I am like an organism. Then how is the organism being? The organism is a collection of cells. How are my individual cells being? Do you see? And what's fascinating is, if you reduce the value of self, your personal value, you will reach the universe. And if you increase the value, you become being itself. Like, you become the universe. I shouldn't say universe, you become being the universe. Okay, let's say universe. And if you add, you're also becoming the universe. But the only difference is that, what, in some sense, how many layers open up? Do you know? I don't know how to say it. For me, it's a very profound idea that there is a system admin, that this system admin has simulated a testing zone. There's 8 billion users currently in this testing zone, and their values are mainly being extracted from inside the simulated reality, but the curiosity for what is outside of the simulated reality is also there. Do you see? That means, if an extraterrestrial comes and asks me, for example, how are you being? Okay, let's say extraterrestrial doesn't talk like that. Let's say extraterrestrial says, how are you being? I would be like, yeah, man, I'm just being a human, individual human, going about my day. But if the extraterrestrial says, how is humanity being? It's a way more sophisticated answer for me. Even the personal answer could be sophisticated, but the what all of us are doing is the sum total of our value. That means, check this out. This is going to blow your mind. Right now, let's say we have person A and person B. Person A suddenly becomes super shy, and they're not confident. Okay? They suddenly, person A, let's say, okay, why am I saying person A and B? There's a person who is confident, and there is a person who isn't confident. Okay? Now, the person who is confident, which is that they are accepting either their personal value, or let's say it's filtered through societal value as well. It's like, what I'm trying to say is that if you value yourself, you are also being a value in the civilization. That means, let's say right now we look at 100%, like 8 billion beings. Let's say if let's say if 60% of human beings living on Earth are confident, and it's 40%, right? That means it's like the value is there. I don't know how to say it. But if it was reversed, right, then the value of civilization would be affected. So how you value yourself is also being a value in the overall societal value. Okay? And how the society is having a universal, is being a value in regards to how the universe values itself. So if you value yourself, then humanity values itself more. If humanity values itself more, the universe values itself more. Do you see? So it can be poetically in the future be an obligation for you to value yourself, but not a sort of, you know, limited to a box kind of value. The idea is that, especially when there's various conscious points, value is on some level subjective, whether it's arising from your own subjects, how you subjectify reality, the objects you see, and give them meaning through language, or how others give you value. Do you know? So it's as if, like, when I look in the mirror, that's a value proposition. When somebody looks at me, that's another value proposition. Currently, there's 3 viewers listening. There's 3 value propositions right now of my own when I look at my own value, right? So, but the question is, what is like a contrast of more significant values being paid more attention to than lesser ones, right? And for someone who, let's say, can relate to the idea of OCD, it all has to do, that concept has to do with the organization of reality, which is signifying a value. So, for example, when you go at a desk and let's say at a dinner table and the plates and everything is symmetrically all there, right? Then there's like, that has a value, like a polished value. But when, imagine one fork is off a little bit, you know? Like, most people don't care, but I'm saying, like, I'm just giving you an example that it comes down to that your value of yourself has an organizational architecture to it, right? But it's also based on what you might care for society way more than you care for yourself. Do you know? Or you might care for God, for the system admin more than you care for the world. Do you know? But when I think about, like, what's a sort of winning in all dimensions approach, is that trying to optimize all the values, whether you start small or big. It's where in the value, you can say human beings are in a value shifting game, like value shifting game. Civilization is in a value optimization game. So a mature species, right, also has the capacity to view itself from outside of itself. So if you right now, you're sitting somewhere, imagine you just closed your eyes or whatever. You imagine you could just visualize yourself, right, looking from outside of you at you. Do you know? This is called being self-conscious in a sense. Okay, now imagine the humanity, species, the collective, having an ability to see itself from outside of itself. But the key thing is that it will not be a collective anymore. So as civilizations, or as humanity and species mature, they are also shifting from their current value because they are noticing that the moment can be revalued differently. Do you know? So an advanced civilization, a mature humanity, would be a humanity that is caring for its own personal value, or how are human beings, each individual's living here, making up the collective societal value. And then in regards to how is my value, like let's say humanity's value, valuable to the universe. Like, as far as I know, there's only one concept of how the humanity has a value outside of itself, and it's the higher power. So your maturity is based on your understanding of values beyond your own. Anyways, I guess I would like to finish off here. And I hope this has been an interesting talk for you. And also, I hope you're doing and being well. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most benevolent, the most merciful. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise due to the Lord of the worlds. Rabbi Firli. May God forgive us for the mistakes that we know we make and the mistakes that we don't know we make. I hope this lecture has been valuable for you. Thank you.